All right. There we go. That was set to a private stream before. There we go. So we should be public now. That was set to a... If you're joining, welcome. My name is Andrew. You might be in one of my courses right now. If you're not, welcome nonetheless. What we do here in this live office hour is just answer any particular GRE questions that you've come across. And we want to keep the focus on specific questions, not so much general, what's the test about? I'm happy to answer those as well, but priority given to official questions here. So if you are just joining us, please feel free to introduce yourself, where you are in your GRE journey. Maybe you're in one of my classes, but you have a weird screen name that I don't recognize. And we'll get to it. So let's start out with a few questions that someone sent in regarding distance, rate, and time. These questions come up quite a bit on the test, and a lot of folks struggle with them. But we will take a look at them here. Excuse me, where is that question? Okay, so these are work questions. And why don't we start with, this one. Where did that go? Let's start with this one. I'm going to paste this into the picture. This is a colliding trains problem. So here's the story. Paste this in. There we go. Okay. Again, if you're just joining, welcome. There we are. All right, so the story is, Al and Ben are drivers for SD Trucking Company. One snowy day, Ben left SD at 8 a.m. heading east, and Al left SD at 11 a.m. heading west. At a particular time later that day, the dispatcher received data from SD's vehicle tracking system, and the data showed that up to that time, Al had averaged 40 miles an hour and Ben had averaged 20 miles an hour. It also showed that Al and Ben had driven a combined total of 240 miles. What time did the dispatcher receive data from the vehicle tracking system? And I just noticed that some of that got covered by my face, so I'm going to move it over here. There we go. Okay. And again, if you're just joining, feel free to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from. But let's take a look at this question together, because speed, distance, rate, time questions are questions that really, really tend to baffle folks on the test. Now this one, we have two drivers driving in opposite directions. I'm going to move this down here. All right, we have two drivers driving in opposite directions. They start from the same point, SD, whatever that is, South Dakota, I don't know, right? They start from the same point, and Ben drives east at 8 a.m. Al drives west at 11 a.m. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out how far Ben gets on his own, right? We want to see how far Ben gets all by himself. How far is Ben traveling before Al starts traveling? Well, he leaves at 8, Al starts leaving at 11, so that's 3 hours. Now, Ben is driving 20 miles an hour for 3 hours, meaning that he gets 60 miles away, right? He's 60 miles to the, Ben's going east. We'll go in the other direction here. Where's my eraser? Easier way to do this is just that. So Ben is going east on his snowmobile, and he gets 60 miles before Al even starts moving, right? He gets 60 miles before Al even starts moving. Al leaves at 11 a.m. heading west. So at this point, Ben has traveled 60 miles, and now Al's going to start traveling. The dispatcher finds that cumulatively, they have traveled 240 miles. So we want to know at what point in time they have total traveled 240 miles. And we can actually do this hour by hour. So we're at 11 a.m. Let's go one more hour. How much further does Ben get? Ben goes another 20 miles, right? So that's a total of 80 miles for him. And in that same hour, Al has gone 40 miles. So we're keeping track here. 40 miles. So right now we have 120 miles total. Okay. Another hour, another 20, another 40. Keep track, 80, 140, 160, 180. Right? We're still not at 240 miles. Go another 20 miles, go another 40 miles. That's what? 40, 40, 40, 120 plus 60 was 180, 200, 240. Okay, so at that point, right, they've gone a total of 240 miles. And we just need to figure out what time that is. So remember, Ben traveled alone until 11 a.m. So this is at 11 a.m. And then together they each traveled an hour, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we are 3 hours after 11 a.m. And that leaves us with answer option B. Now, you might say like, well, am I supposed to do that every time I get one of these questions? That seems a little clunky. I'm just drawing it out to illustrate how it works, right? But what you can do, you might have noticed this, right, is that every hour they're traveling a combined distance of how much? Every hour they're traveling a combined distance of 60. Ben travels 20, Al travels 40. So together, in 1 hour, they're traveling a total distance of 60. And that means that once I figure out that there are, I have 60 miles covered already, that leaves me with 180. How many more hours is it going to take to cover 180 miles? Well, 3 more hours, because 60 times 3 is 180. Now, we zipped through that one pretty quickly. Please feel free to send any questions if you have any about that particular explanation. And we will move on to the next one. So any other questions? I see we have a viewer here. Welcome. A few other people join us probably later throughout the hour, but let's keep rolling. So we'll do another one of these work distance time questions. Here we go. Okay, let's see. So this one came to us courtesy of Neil. And I will add it right into the chat here. Sorry if that screen is bouncing around. Hope no one gets vertigo or car sick or anything. What's a good one to do? How about this one? Yeah, so this has to do with rounding. And I'll copy paste this into the chat. Here we go. And here we go. Well, move it over here. All right. So, next question. On a recent trip, Cindy drove her car 290 miles, rounded to the nearest 10 miles, and used 12 gallons of gasoline, rounded to the nearest gallon. The actual number of miles per gallon that Cindy's car got on this trip must have been between what and what? So it is important to know how to round, right? And what that's all about. And this illustrates a very important principle of the test. Sometimes what we need to do is find a range of possible values. So what are we looking for here? We're looking for the miles per gallon. Miles per gallon. And we want to know the minimum possible value of this and the maximum possible value of this. So the minimum possible value of this whole fraction and the maximum possible value of this whole fraction. Well, what's the minimum possible value? To make this number as small as possible, I would need to make the numerator very small, but the denominator very big. So if she drove 290 miles, what's the smallest number of miles she could have driven that would round to 290? Well, it's 285, right? Rounded to the nearest 10 miles. Because 285 rounds up to 290. So right there, A and B and E are all out. And what's the greatest number of gallons of gasoline that she could have used? Well, it would be 12.49, right? So we're talking strictly between here, meaning that since it's rounded to the nearest gallon, rounded to 12, we're looking at 12.5. So right there, there's our answer. We don't even need to look at the maximum value. That gets it for us right there. All right. Again, feel free to send in any questions. I'm going to take a look at my email, see if any have come in. Got one a little blurry, so we'll resend that one. Let's find another one. Another speed, rate, time question again. Sorry for that bouncing. Here we go. Another speed, rate, time question. Why don't we look at average speed? Here's a good one. And I'm gonna screenshot this one because the formatting might be a little weird, but we'll screenshot that in, add it into the board here. There we go. And, oops. Here we go. Okay. So the story is, during a trip, Francine traveled X% of the total distance at an average speed of 40 miles an hour. Rest of the distance at an average speed of 60 miles an hour. In terms of X, what was Francine's average speed for the entire trip? Now, it's important to understand what average speed means. Average speed does not mean the average of the speeds, right? It is tempting to think about it that way, but that's not actually what average speed means. So average speed is not the average of the speed. Well, what is average speed then? Average speed, and this is a formula that we absolutely have to know, is the total distance divided by the total time. So that's the formula that we need for average speed. Right? Average speed is total distance divided by total time. Now, in this case, we don't actually have a distance, right? And so we kind of scratch our heads and say, well, what am I supposed to do then? Here's the good news. We're dealing with an undefined distance, right? And a variable percent. And the answer options have variable percents. And if you've taken my class, or if you've done any one-on-one instruction with me, I've probably hit this over the head a million times. What can we do when we have variables in the question and variables in the answer options? Well, we can make up our own numbers, right? That is probably the most important strategy that you can use on this test. Make up your own numbers. So let's do that here. So we'll say that during this trip, Francine traveled X% of the total distance at an average speed of 40 miles an hour, and the rest of the distance at an average speed of 60 miles an hour. In terms of X, what was Francine's average speed for the entire trip? I'm going to say that X is 40, right? I'm just going to decide that X is 40% of the distance. And you might notice my reason for doing that. It's useful in this case because the first leg is 40 miles, but really any number will work. Any number is totally fine. You could have said 50%, 20%, 80%, 73.2%. It all works out. Totally fine. So if we say that she traveled 40% of the total distance at an average speed of 40 miles an hour, and the rest of the distance at an average speed of 60 miles an hour, what is her total distance? Well, again, it's not defined. And that's an invitation to make up a number. Why don't we just say that this total trip was 100 miles? Why not, right? So 100 miles is the total trip, total distance. How much time did she spend on the first leg, and how much time did she spend on the second leg? Well, let's calculate that. If she traveled 40 miles an hour for 40% of the distance, that's 40 miles, then how many hours is that going to take? It's going to take 1 hour, right? If I'm traveling 40 miles an hour for 40 hours, then I'm going to do it in 1 hour. And for the second part of the trip, she's going 60 miles an hour, and that's the rest of the trip. So that's 60 miles at 60 miles an hour, right? How many hours is that going to take her? Well, it's going to take her another 1 hour. So all I'm going to do is add these together, and what I get is 100 divided by 2, or 50. Okay, here's the fun part, if you want to call it fun, right? The last step that I'm going to take is to plug in the number that I chose, x, here, and whichever one gives me 50, that's the winner. So let's do it. 180 minus 40 is 140 divided by 2. That's not 50. You can check it on your calculator. 40 plus 60, 100 divided by 4. Don't think so. 300 minus 40 is 260 divided by 5. Again, check your calculator. That's not equal to 50. 600 divided by 115 minus 40. That's 75. So 600 divided by 75. That's 8. No dice. And so we're left with answer option E. And let's make sure it works. 12,000 divided by 40 plus 200, or 240. So what is 12,000 divided by 240? Would you look at that? It's 50. And our answer. So answer option E is the correct answer option here. All right. I'll put out, or maybe we'll wait one more minute or so to see if anyone else shows up. If not, you can join us next time. We don't have regular office hours yet. Still figuring out times on those. But you're always welcome to send in questions ahead of time to that email right there at testprepstudios@gmail.com. If you send me a question, I'll run through it in the office hours. Again, priority given to official material, that is official GRE material. That will do it for us today. So any more questions, just send those right in, and I will see you all next time.